Hi folks, I got my first GPS watch in December 2006, so as I'm recording this, December 2018, it's been roughly 12 years. Prior to that, we had no GPS. Didn't really know how far you were running unless you're on a track. We'd go out on a bike or a car and kind of measure out a route, and you knew it wasn't exact, but it was close enough. And the reality, that's true with GPS as well. GPS is close, but it's not precise. Now, if you're in the military, you need to drop missiles, you want to be really precise. Consumer grade GPS just isn't that close, but really it's close enough. What I find is a lot of people think that GPS is just deadly accurate, and you'll see it at races all the time. Somebody's doing a half marathon, they say, well, this came out at 13.2. Obviously, this course is long. Well, the course probably isn't long. It's more likely that you overran the course, or it's just GPS error because, as I said, GPS is close, but it's not really precise. So I'll give you an example of that, and I'll talk about some things I think that to think about when you're using GPS. So this is my latest track work. See how well you can hold up? Now it's in front of my face. But as you can see, so I always run on the inside lane when I'm doing track, and when you look at those red when I'm running around the track, you can see that the GPS does not always have me in the inside lane, even though that's where I always run. In fact, on one of the laps, you can see it had me cutting through on the grass. I didn't do that. And up over here, if I'm pointing right, it's got me in lane 5. I wasn't there. That's because GPS is making a really good estimation as to where I am, but it's not necessarily going to be really precise. The way it works is there's kind of a circle around you, and that circle is anywhere between 10 and 15 meters in diameter. And then the satellites kind of try and triangulate you. They have different spots in the circle. The more satellites you have, the more accurate. If you only had one satellite, it's really inaccurate, but generally going to have somewhere between 3 and 5. But the more you have, they kind of pinpoint you, and GPS essentially makes this big circle and says, I think that mark is somewhere within this circle. And as the circle moves forward, it continues to triangulate and kind of figure out where I am. So you can see right away, 10 to 15 meters is already a little bit off, especially when you're in short distances. But over the scope of a race or a mile, that actually ends up being pretty close. So what are some things that you can do, or I think you should be doing as it relates to GPS? Number one, realizing that close is good enough. GPS is not going to be accurate, but running is more about duration than exactly how long you ran. It's about effort rather than what the pace it is. So GPS is a great tool, and close is good enough. It's going to be fine. Realize also, so if your goal was to run a 9-minute mile, just for the sake of example, what I find happens is if people run 9:05, oh my God, I suck today, I couldn't hit my pace. Whereas if they run 8:55, yeah, I was on fire, I was just killing it today. The fact of the matter is, those both could have been 9, because 9 doesn't mean you ran 9. 9:05 could have been 9. It's GPS plus minus. 8:55 might have been 9. Might have been 9:05. It's plus GPS minus. Just recognize that close is really good enough. Now, I recommend that you ditch instant pace. A lot of people see instant pace. They want to know what they're running right now. At least in my experience, instant pace is not very accurate. It's typically way, way off. And the reason is, if I have that image, think again, that 10 to 15 meters, it's guessing where you are. Now, as that bubble moves forward, there is some autocorrection, if you will, or an algorithm that GPS gets a little bit more accurate, kind of figuring out where you are. In fact, in my experience, it takes about a quarter mile, a third of a mile before it gets relatively close. So when you're using instant pace, you have no opportunity for GPS to do any type of auto correction. So at least in my experience, you're far better off to use lap pace, where you're looking at what your pace is within that mile if you're using it. Instant pace, I think, is really not very useful. Keep it straight. Again, in my experience, the straighter the route, the more accurate GPS is going to be. Go back to the image that I showed you of me on the track. What was really screwing up the track is the circles. So think about that 10 to 15 meters again, and you're somewhere in that. As long as that bubble is moving forward, GPS does that autocorrect there, more and more accurate to where you are. What happens is, when the bubble's moving forward, and it thinks you're moving forward, but you've actually turned, that's where it has to autocorrect even more. So you turned, it thinks you went up here, then it corrects and pulls you back over here. That's why it had me running in lane 5 when I was really in lane 1. It's trying to guess more as to where I am. Now, obviously, sometimes you're going to have curves. I'm not recommending you go out and just find courses that are straight, but just recognize that the more turns you have on the route you're running, chances are the more off that the GPS is going to be. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, give it some time. If you're using the auto not out of the instant one, I found that that's not very accurate. I keep mine set on lap pace, and my laps are generally a mile long. So I recognize that at the very beginning of that mile, that pace is usually not going to be very close. I find it's always off. After about a quarter mile, a third of a mile, then it kind of settles in, and it gets to be that kind of close is good enough. And then also recognize if you have a real lot of dense foliage or buildings, that can affect things. Why can that affect things? As I said, the more satellites you have tracking you, the more accurate GPS is going to be. So what can happen sometimes with dense foliage or real tall buildings is maybe you had 5 satellites tracking you, but now all of a sudden only 3 can get you because the other 2 are being blocked. 3 is not as accurate as 5. It's going to be a little bit more off. What should you do about that? Avoid running in dense foliage? Absolutely not. Just recognize, again, GPS is going to be close. It's not going to be accurate. So there's some things, my thoughts on GPS. I think it is a fantastic tool, but don't get married to it being this really precise tool because close is good enough.